Yes. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm like 5 minutes early, and that's going to throw people off because usually I'm like 10 minutes late. But that's okay. I gave everybody ample warning, kind of, by going on TikTok. My dog came over here and he's like, "Who are you talking to? You want to come say hi? You want to come say hi again? Come on, little camera shy little bub. Look at you. Can you look at the camera?" He is so terrified. Oh my gosh. Okay. We are on chapter 3, In the Shadow of the Moons, not by Nansa Kong. I have not read this at all for real this time. I think I said that like a week or two ago just to find notes that I had taken on the inside, but this time I literally have not read it. So I went through and I skimmed the first sentence of a few paragraphs, and I know that this chapter is a little bit more about Hyungjin's life, like her husband's life, and also Little Angels. And this is where we get introduced to Bohi Pak. I think it'll let me stay on YouTube Live if I look something up, but I just wanted to make sure everyone is like very thoroughly clear on the fact that Bohi Pak is literally a KCIA agent, a South Korean CIA agent. Bohi Pak. Oop. So if I just look him up real quick, this is a photo of Bohi Pak, right? You can Google him. It says founder of True World Foods, went to Georgetown University, and it says Bohi Pak was a prominent member of the Unification Church, and during the 70s and 80s, he was a major leader in the church movement. He died in 2019. He went to prison because I'm seeing on tparents.org. Isn't it nice when your cult had the internet and they just put all their dirty secrets on their website to archive for later? It's just so helpful. Injin Moon, August 2005, Injinim's letter to members. Dear brothers and sisters, I feel compelled to write this letter concerning Dr. Pak's incarceration due to the tragic nature of the case and the strange turn of events that is keeping him in prison. One thing I'd like to make clear from the beginning is that Dr. Pak has neither asked nor encouraged me to write this letter. Frankly, I've not spoken to him for the past several years, but I know, having spoken to different members of his family, that Dr. Pak is truly sorry for the events that led up to his arrest and for bringing shame and embarrassment to his family, the brothers and sisters of the movement, and my own family. Dr. Pak knows that he has made a terrible mistake in following bad investment advice from people with criminal motives, and he takes full responsibility for his mistakes. Okay. And then I found this thing called Lead Pages, familyfed.lpages.co. Dr. Pak, oh, now he's doctor. Dr. Pak was a lieutenant colonel in the Korean Army when he joined the church in the 1950s. And oh, there's an article about him in Time magazine. Crime, kidnapping of a Moonie. Bohi Pak was the acting leader of the church while Reverend Moon served an 18-month prison sentence in federal prison for tax evasion. And then Bohi Pak was abducted outside of a Manhattan hotel. Blindfolded and handcuffed, Pak was driven 80 miles to a house in Slate Hill, New York, where his kidnappers tortured him with electric shocks. I don't know if TikTok just cut me off. Okay. 2 days later, Pak's abductors ordered him to fly to Washington and transfer $500,000 in church funds to a numbered bank account in Switzerland. They threatened to harm Pak's wife and 6 children who live in suburban Virginia if the ransom was not paid. He knew 2 of the kidnappers personally, and then the FBI was able to cancel the wire transfer and track him down. The kidnappers included Unification Church associates Song Hui Nam and Young Soo Se. The abduction arose out of an internal church dispute and was an attempt to change Unification Church policy. The drama. And that's it. That's the Time article. So if I search Bo Hi Pak, KCIA, in the Washington Post from 1978, Reverend Moon Aide concedes KCIA sent him. Oh, it's got a paywall. Reverend Moon Aide concedes the KCIA sent him $3,000. Aide to Reverend Moon got $3,000 from the KCIA in the 70s, which equates to a lot more money today. I'm so annoyed. I'm so annoyed. It is nice. Oh, I'm going to try to get better at describing when I'm just talking freely, when I'm reading the book, and when I'm reading a comment from someone online. Because I realized after I post these, nobody can see any of the chat conversations. So Virgil Doc Purple Heart says, "It is nice seeing you online again talking about this important topic." It's nice to be back, kind of. It is and it isn't. Thank you. It's stressful being back, but it's more stressful not being back. What is Prol Wiki? Oh, there's an article in the New York Times. Former KCIA head says Park Tong-sun was a Korean agent. There's a Google group post saying the enigma of Bo Hi Pak. Troop told me that Bo Hi Pak admitted to him that he was or is a KCIA agent. This was posted in 99 by K. Gordon Neufeld. I once made a point of reviewing old newspaper articles from the New York Times from 1976 and 1977 when the scandal involving Bo Hi Pak and the alleged payoffs to congressmen, especially through the agency of Tong-sun Park, not a Unification Church member, first broke. So that was Koreagate. When they were, Tong-sun Park was a wealthy man from Korea, I believe, like a Nepo baby essentially, and he became a South Korean CIA asset / agent, and he was introduced to members of Congress and brought to like prayer breakfasts and other events like through parties and properties they bought in Washington, D.C., and basically went around and handed American Congress people stacks of cash in $100 bills. And we're like, so you're going to keep U.S. armed forces in South Korea, right? Atta girl. Atta boy. And all of these perpetually insider trading, not actually doing their job, Congress people were like, of course, you guys are just like AIPAC. We love you. Like literally they had conversations with Tong-sun Park about AIPAC. And they're like, we'll get you all set up. This is how AIPAC bribes us. Like, I take deposits from AIPAC on this day. So welcome to the bribing club. We're so glad to have you. And what do you want us to tell our constituents? Okay. And what are we actually going to do? Okay. And how much you're going to pay me to do it? Like, embarrassing. And then when they broke the news about how this was happening, who gets the blame? Who gets harassed? Random legal South Korean immigrants who have never been rich in their life. right? Like, who have never been to Washington, D.C. Anyways, so I'm reading a post from a Google group by someone who's been reading up about this. So he's been reading newspaper articles. I may post some of those articles. They reveal that in the late 70s, it was well known that Bohipak was involved with the KCIA. One reporter who was more recently looking into Moon's involvement with a Russian ballet troupe told me that Bohipak admitted to him that he was or is a KCIA agent. Yet I have a copy of an article from the Times in 1976 where Pak denies the connection. I have at times wondered if Pak was the real power behind the throne, and if the entire Unification Church was not in fact a KCIA plot from the get-go. However, there are several things that make this doubtful. It is far more likely that the KCIA backed Moon merely because they felt he could be useful, but they were never able to fully control him. I guess we'll never know. As such, Pak may have been the crucial link between Moon and the KCIA, and when Moon felt he could safely get away with it, he dispatched Pak through the bizarre agency of the falsely resurrected Hung Hin Moon. As far as I know, Pak had never been as prominent since. Yet for Pak to have submitted to the beating he received from the Zimbabwe pretender, he would have had to have been a believer. Or could there be another explanation? Could it be that Pak felt he had to put up with it for some reason that is even more compelling, such as fear of Moon or others doing even worse to him, or fear of his KCIA buddies back in Korea? The man is a mystery. Sincerely, K. Gordon Neufeld. So yeah, it's interesting because it's like, for a dude who apparently had so much more power than the average member and had so much pull with Reverend Moon and like pulled the strings a little bit, he tolerated a lot. He tolerated getting kidnapped. He tolerated getting tortured. So besides getting kidnapped by other members of the Unification Church for a $500,000 ransom, which in the 70s would have been closer to $1 million in today's money, it's like, I guess he also, there was something that happened with diplomats on the African continent, and he tolerated getting the shit beat out of him there too. So that's just a little bit about the hot mess that is Bohipak, the very cold and dead mess that is Bohipak. But we're going to read about him here in this chapter. And what's interesting is, like, I've had people comment on my YouTube channel that, oh, you can't try to claim that the KCIA was involved the moment that Bohipak stopped being active. First of all, that's false. Second, Bohipak stayed active well into the 2000s because there are second generation my age who have memories of getting whipped with a stick by him at workshops. Hang on, I gotta close the door real quick. Come here, Finny Fin. Hi, Bubba. Okay. It's getting too cold out there. Oops. Just kicked my stand for what? For what? Okay. All right, let's read chapter 3. It's been 13, 14 minutes. Okay, where did we leave off? Oh yeah, so we found out that Nansa Kong's dad created McColl and Ginseng Up. He created the company Ilhua because he was a chemist, and he kept none of the profits, basically. He like paid himself what amounts to like minimum wage, I guess, and had a hard time paying for his children's school fees on time, even though he made Reverend Moon arguably millions and millions and millions of dollars, and invented a soft drink that has since taken the world by storm and helped Korean barley farmers enormously. The riches went to Sun Myung Moon. Chapter 3. The Little Angels Art School is one of the finest schools for the creative and performing arts in South Korea. It is owned and operated by the Unification Church, but there are no overt signs of the primary and secondary school's connection to the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. Most of the teachers and the majority of students are not Moonies. Religion is not part of the curriculum. Like so many institutions run by the Reverend Moon around the world, the Little Angels School downplays its relationship with a religious sect that is still deeply distrusted, even in the founder's homeland. I entered Little Angels in the 6th grade, joining my older brother Jin on the sprawling campus, which then housed classes for students in grades 7 through 12. It has since expanded to include the elementary grades. The school is on the outskirts of Seoul, about 15 minutes from our home. Jin and I would leave our house at 7 a.m. to catch the number 522 city bus. The buses were always crowded with adults on their way to work and students laden with heavy school bags. 4 or 5 buses would routinely pass us by, too packed to pick up even 2 extra passengers. We would pray for the chance to court suffocation if only a bus would stop. Arriving late was not tolerated at Little Angels. A tardy student would be forced to sit on a concrete bench outside the principal's office with her arms raised above her head for 30 minutes. She would then be required to write a letter of apology to her teacher and classmates for the disruption her late arrival had caused. So draconian, really. That is my own input. So draconian. On the way to and from this bus stop, Jin insisted I walk several paces behind him. Being seen with one's little sister is no less a humiliation for an adolescent boy in Seoul than in the rest of the world. I willingly obliged. I treated my brother with a formal respect that my non-church friends found both curious and amusing. When I spoke to him, I even used the form of address Korean children reserve for adults. Pause. I feel like that says a lot. I feel like that says a lot about how early the indoctrination that men are the head of the household and that male bodies are worth more than female bodies in general happens in the Unification Church. It gets them young. And it's like the Unification Church is obnoxiously patriarchal, but they don't ever let you address it, and they will refute it if you ever try to bring it up. They'll be like, "Why are you making everything weird? Shut the fuck up." Without saying shut the fuck up, you know? And it's kind of crazy making. Okay, unpause. In many ways, my relationship with my brother replicated the one between my parents. And here she's talking about Korean culture in general. Korea's is a rigid patriarchal culture. My father was a gentleman, but he was no egalitarian. He was the undisputed head of our household. What did I just say? I'm on the same brainwave. Okay. His position was reinforced by the teachings of the Unification Church. A marriage is one of mutual respect, but the wife is in the object position to her husband, just as mankind is in the object position to God. That's crazy. It's like your husband is God and you're a mere mortal. Could it be me? I never questioned the balance of power between my mother and father, and I unconsciously modeled my behavior toward my brother on their example. This is so, pause while I rant. This is so deeply ingrained in second generation Moonies that I have been on group podcasts where grown adult women who have been out of the church longer than me will become deeply and viscerally uncomfortable trying to directly talk about how much they were treated like garbage, like literal animals, because they were women, while their fathers and husbands and brothers and sons were lifted up on these like golden pedestals. And it's almost like to even challenge that train of thought becomes uncomfortable because as a woman in the Unification Church, you're so used to being like, if not literally physically harmed or like screamed at, you're used to being cut off mid-sentence, talked over, and then like shamed passive aggressively for even attempting to touch the topic with a 10-foot pole. Okay, back to reading. By the time I was in middle school, the Reverend Moon and his family had moved to the United States. He was directed by God to move to America in 1971, he told his followers, because the United States was on the verge of a moral collapse similar to that which destroyed Rome in the 1st century. He went to America to save it from itself. He went preaching his own brand of rabid anti-communism and moral fundamentalism. He conducted rallies across the United States and found a following among alienated youth caught in the American generation gap, quote unquote, young people out of step with both their parents and their peers. Their entree into the Unification Church was often through CARP, C-A-R-P, the Collegiate Association for the Research of Principles. Such a bullshit acronym just to be the name of a fish. Typically of the membership. Oh, wait. I skipped a paragraph. CARP was established in the United States in 1973 at the height of protests against American expansion of the war in Vietnam into Cambodia and Laos. The Reverend Moon's dire warnings of the threat of communism fell largely on deaf ears among American students, incensed by their own country's imperialism. CARP recruiters targeted the idealistic and the lonely on college campuses. I'm really glad she makes a point of saying that. They targeted idealistic and lonely people. Students too conservative or apolitical to find common cause with the anti-war movement often found a mission in CARP. Typical of the membership were the dozens of fresh-faced, neatly dressed young people who staged a day of prayer and fasting on the sidewalk outside of the White House in support of President Richard M. Nixon during the Watergate hearings. So, pause. Just so we're clear, Reverend Moon and CARP exerted all of their effort on being aggressively pro-Vietnam War during anti-Vietnam War protests in the name of anti-communism. Because fuck human lives, apparently. Both American and Vietnamese. Fuck them. Anti-communism is more important, according to the Unification Church. And they also were like, but he's not such a bad guy, like during Watergate. They're like, leave Richard Nixon alone. Like, can you imagine being the person who sincerely makes that argument? They fasted and prayed on the steps of the White House during Watergate. They were like, but he's anti-communist. It's exhausting. It really is. Okay, unpause. They held signs that said, forgive, love, unite. They were there on the Washington Mall on the fringes of anti-war demonstrations, extolling the value of patriotism and the courage of President Nixon in the face of his godless critics. Pause again so I can rant. That's one of the things that they discussed doing during Koreagate, right? So before this started, I hope the dates line up. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But it's like some of the things that Bo Hi Pak and Reverend Moon would do to get Tongson Park into the right rooms so that he could bribe people to change American foreign policy was agreeing to be unpaid volunteers who would attend pro-war protests and then report in the Washington Times these like highly exaggerated numbers. And then they would attend anti-war protests on the fringes, specifically to go undercover and tear down all of their anti-war posters as they were putting them up and sabotage anti-war protests from the inside as they were happening. Chef Dizzy on TikTok Live says, the rabid support for Trump in UC makes so much more sense in light of this. Yeah, it's really just a continuation of what they've been doing. Okay, back to reading. When CARP members in the United States were not offering encouragement to an embattled president, they were selling flowers on campus, on street corners, in airports, at shopping centers, to raise money for the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his divine mission. This next part's a quote. The victory of the Allied side in World War II was not an end in itself. From the providential point of view, it had the purpose of preparing America and the world for the second coming of the Messiah, Sun Myung Moon has written. What has happened? The United States did not grasp such a vision. For 40 years, this country has been drifting down the path of self-indulgence, fun, and destruction. Hang on. TikTok Live's making me touch the screen. Ooh, confirm. So rude. I don't even know if you guys could hear what I was saying while it made me do that. Okay. God forbid people in the United States have fun. This country has been drifting down the path of self-indulgence, fun, and destruction. Drugs have infiltrated the whole country. Young people have been corrupted and turned more and more towards delinquency. Free sex has become a way of life. Ooh. Ooga booga. But this has not been limited to the United States. As the leader of the free world, the United States has infected the world with its ills. Unless something stops this trend, this nation and the whole world are destined to collapse, end quote. So pause while I interject my own thoughts. I once found a dress in my mom's closet that was beautiful and flowy and colorful and flowery. And she said, that's my wedding dress. Like, obviously, she had a plain white, proper, conservative wedding dress that she didn't really own or keep for her mass wedding ceremony. But when her and my dad got married by a rabbi in a separate ceremony in Canada, because she was an illegal immigrant to the US from Australia, she wore that dress. She wore the flowery dress. And me, a millennial 90s baby, the only sort of like reference that I had for that flower pattern and for that style of dress was like the literal costumes of hippies that I had seen at Party City. Like, I remember I really liked bell-bottom jeans because there was this like 70s revival in fast fashion happening when I was that age. So not knowing any better, I was like, "Oh wow, it's a hippie dress." And immediately my mom was like, "Don't ever say that. I am not a hippie." And like her reaction never ever made sense to me until I got older, until I started deconstructing the movement and I realized that like rabid, ridiculous, obsessive, literally violent and criminal anti-communism and anti-free sex, anti-drug, anti-hippie movement was the entire thesis of the Unification Church, the entire purpose of the Unification Church. And my parents were the blueprint to create the like crunchy hippie granola version of fascism that is now enormously popular. That a British organization used with Facebook data to help Trump win the election and help Brexit happen. So there's this book about Cambridge Analytica, which sounds like a friggin' encyclopedia. It's not. Cambridge Analytica was a private firm in England that hired a bunch of different people from across the political spectrum and a whistleblower who helped create that organization and helped do a bunch of data analytics for the far right in England and in the United States. He wrote an expose, like a tell-all book about how they did research interviews with different demographics that the far right had never fully utilized. And that included people who were interested in yoga and interested in all natural food and interested in fitness, interested in spirituality rather than fundamentalist Christianity. And they basically pinpointed those people using not, unfortunately, Facebook did not make it illegal to collect millions and millions and millions of citizens' Facebook data. And so Cambridge Analytica paid to create targeted ads that sucked those people into the alt-right pipeline, right? And my parents were the analog, in-person, in real life blueprint version of that move. Does that make sense? So it's like what Cambridge Analytica and what the far right, paid for by Steve Bannon, paid for by other billionaires that I have not memorized the names of because they're gross to me. I hate even thinking about them for too long because they're deeply unpleasant and emotionally stunted people. But they paid to create this like crunchy granola version of fascism that is now everywhere. And what they paid to do digitally from the comfort of their own homes to a lesser degree than what the Moonies did in person to the extreme. And it worked. Chef Dizzy on TikTok says, the ponytail was given to Moon at a leaders meeting, look, the hippies are cutting their hair. Oh, and before you said, my dad had long hair and was part of a yoga cult. He's told me how when he joined and cut his hair, the ponytail was given to Moon, saying, look, the hippies are cutting their hair. Yeah, the Moonies were a counter cult designed to infiltrate the anti-war movement. So there's a quote online from, I think, someone in the White House. I can't remember his name, but there's a quote online saying, like, we can't make it illegal to be Black and we can't make it illegal to be a hippie, but we can make marijuana illegal and start spreading a bunch of propaganda about who smokes weed and what weed is. So in addition to like creating policies that gave like, oh shit, I don't know if I'm going to get banned for even just saying the names of those substances. But in addition to giving like extremely harsh mandatory minimum sentencing for the same substances that were the cheaper street version that like hippies and minorities engaged in, like harsher minimum sentences for the cheaper version than the expensive version that a bunch of conservative white kids were using, right? It's like they gave the places and the things that hippies and minorities engaged in really harsh systems of control, and they also had the Moonies be like a private group of thousands of volunteers to go and harass people for free and be counter protesters for free. That's my rant. Let's keep reading. Sometimes I start a sentence and I can't remember how I was going to finish it. It happens. But back to these neatly composed sentences. Reverend Moon was talking about, unless something stops this trend, this nation and the whole world are destined to collapse. Sweetie, I think you mean the whole nation is destined to become a little too socialist for oligarchs' comfort. I think that's what you mean. The man who could prevent the apocalypse, with a capital A, of course, was Sun Myung Moon. To that end, the Reverend Moon himself settled with his growing family into a mansion in the quaint village of Tarrytown in the Hudson River Valley of New York. In 1972, he purchased 22 acres in Westchester County for $850,000. The Belvedere Estate was one of the area's architectural gems. The stucco mansion was built in 1920 with 16 bedrooms, 6 large public rooms for living and dining, 10 full bathrooms, a commercial-sized kitchen, and a full basement. The mansion looked out over rolling lawns, ancient trees, and an artificial 1-acre pond, complete with wooden bridge and waterfall. There was a swimming pool and tennis courts and breathtaking views of the Hudson River from the quarry-tiled second-floor sun deck. 5 other buildings stood on the property, including a carriage house that was only slightly smaller than the mansion, with 10 bedrooms and 3 full baths and 10 public rooms. There was a 5-bedroom wood frame cottage built in 1735, a gardener's cottage, an artist studio, and a recreation building, plus a 4,000 square foot garage and 3 large greenhouses. A year later, the Reverend Moon purchased a second 18-acre estate not far from Belvedere for $566,150. The centerpiece of the property was a 3-story brick mansion with 12 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a living room, dining room, den, kitchen, an enormous tiled solarium on the west side of the house. What is a solarium? Pretty sure a solarium is just like a sunroom. The Reverend Moon christened the place East Garden when he and his family took up residence. The Moons retained a private suite of rooms in Belvedere, but used that estate primarily to host guests and church functions. My phone with TikTok Live is on 10%. I don't care. I like how she made these kind of like run-on sentences and is giving very specific numbers. She came with receipts, bitch. She's like, try me. I know exactly how much money he spent. I love this for her. Small buildings dotted the rustic East Garden estate overlooking the Hudson River. A security booth guarded the entrance on Sunnyside Lane, and nearby was a gatehouse with 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen, plus a small basement. Just up the hill from the mansion was a lovely stone house with 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, living room, dining room, den, and kitchen. It was known as Cottage House. New York was the base of the Reverend Moon's operations, but he still made frequent visits to Korea. When he did, he or one of his top aides would sometimes visit the Little Angels Art School. Oh, God. Okay. So rudely interrupted. It was always an occasion for rejoicing as much for the interruption of regular class time as for the chance to see the man some of us considered the new Messiah, and all of us knew to be the school's wealthy benefactor. Korean schools are much like those in Japan and throughout the Pacific Rim. The emphasis is on rote memorization and repetitive drills. By the end of elementary school, I could do advanced mathematics, but I could not think critically. It was not a skill that was either taught or valued. Children's minds were considered empty vessels to be filled with knowledge. We were clay to be molded, sculptures to be shaped. This was as true of our moral as of our intellectual development. The educational system, no different at Little Angel School than elsewhere in Korea, stressed deference to authority. It prized consensus and conformity, obedience and acceptance. It prepared me perfectly for life in an authoritarian religion that did not tolerate dissent. I really want to find a mother flippin' phone charger real quick before this phone dies. Pause. Excuse me. Anything. Nice. Found one. Okay. And she's back. I wish you guys could see how my dog follows me everywhere from room to room. He's like, where are we going? What are we doing? And now he's sitting patiently, exactly like 3 feet away at all times. Yay. Okay. Oh. Sorry for the super long pauses, because I know some people put this on in the background and just listen to it like a podcast. Because I was a disciplined child, academics and music came easily to me. I was a good student by Korean standards. I studied piano with a dutifulness, but a lack of fire that I knew pained my mother's heart. I had not inherited her passion for the instrument. I won school piano competitions in the 3rd and 6th grade, but the concert stage was my mother's dream, not mine. I was super into the piano too. I swear to God, if this keeps asking me to trust this computer. No, trust no one. Do not ever trust this computer. It might keep asking me to trust the computer until I say trust. Fine. Not now. There we go. In November 1980, we were pleased to learn that the daily school routine would be broken by a visit from Bo Hipak, one of Reverend Moon's close advisors to Little Angels. By then, the Reverend Moon had become a darling of conservative Republicans in the United States. He had mastered the art of the photo opportunity, having his picture taken with as many prominent world leaders as he could engineer. Those photographs were presented to us as concrete evidence of Father's growing influence in the world. There's a word for that. There is a word for that. It's like magical manipulation, where everything is used as proof of things that are not related. Like things that are not in any way cause and effect are conflated to be cause and effect. That's a method of milieu control, according to a man who studied how American prisoners of war were thought reformed in Chinese POW camps. Robert J. Lifton, he has like, I think 8 principles of thought reform. And one of them is being like, see, why would that happen if everything I want you to believe isn't true? And then you're just like, what? Intraday's son on TikTok says, is that like performative behavior? So performative is a word not really unique to manipulation. Anyone can be performative at any time. In a lot of ways, what I'm doing right now is performative. A lot of the times, everyone everywhere is performing a little bit. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. But you see this same type of like magical manipulation and giving credit where credit is not due all the time in QAnon, in regular Christianity, in the cult of Trump, to be real with you. It's like, okay, so he says the behavior is with purpose and not just genuinely random. You know, it's interesting. I feel like the people who paid Reverend Moon and told him where to go, for them, it would be deliberate. But for people who get love bombed and get classically conditioned to change the way they think, yeah, I understand what you're asking more now. Is like, is it intentional versus genuinely random? And what I'm saying is like, in the same way that someone who starts a disinformation campaign understands that they're lying, but the people who believe that disinformation pass it on and don't understand that it's a lie, so that's technically misinformation because they're somewhat innocent and they've just been misinformed. For the people who started the Unification Church and the people who are in the upper echelon, the inner circle of a cult, they might understand that they're lying on purpose. They might understand that they wear a mask when they talk to members, that they take off when they're reaping the benefits of those members and their hard work behind closed doors. But the members themselves, most of the time, don't understand what they're doing and how it's manipulative. They just understand that if they want to be rewarded socially for their behavior instead of ostracized and punished for their behavior, this is what they have to do. This is what they have to get excited about, because getting excited about anything else is not acceptable. And they might not even be thinking that so bluntly, but that's what their nervous system and their muscle memory has been conditioned for, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? It's like when someone's being love bombed, when someone's really lonely and idealistic and they get invited somewhere and they get emotionally manipulated and they get sleep deprived, food deprived, or even if they're not intensely sleep deprived, if they're just surrounded, right, by people who are all acting and thinking the same, and they can't handle the emotional friction anymore of constantly being confronted and told that they're doing things incorrectly, constantly emotionally blackmailed for not fitting in with the group, then someone will learn, they'll be re-socialized to learn new behavior unconsciously oftentimes. In fact, the entire time, I think we talked about this last week, there are church members who have been in the Unification Church who are still in the Unification Church for more than 50 years. Like at this point, they've been in the Unification Church for longer than they were ever out of it before. And they're sitting there giving all of their money to Reverend Moon. Whenever a family member dies, they give all of that life insurance, all of that inheritance to Reverend Moon immediately, no questions asked, and then go and ask the government for help and ask their children for help to pay rent, right? They're literally like, they only married their spouse because Reverend Moon told them to, and they're still sitting there being like, I'm not brainwashed. I'm too smart for that. I could leave at any time. I know exactly when I'm being manipulated. I'm just playing along. And that's how they get you. It's like, what's the difference? What is the difference? People will sit there being like, oh, no, I understand what they're doing. I'm too smart to be manipulated. But I don't know. It's not a big deal. I've spent so long in here anyway. It's too hard to start over. It's not that deep. It's just a different religion. It's just, so they spend all their time and give all their money anyway. You know what I mean? It's like, even people who are the most brainwashed protect their sense of identity and their sense of self and the idea that they are smart and can't be lied to. They protect that belief in themselves by constantly telling themselves that they understand exactly what's going on and they are too smart to be brainwashed as they are actively getting brainwashed. Because the gag is, if you're even in the same room spending more than 0 minutes with this group, they've already won, because you could be somewhere else doing something completely different with your time. And they'll be like, no, but they wanted me to do this and I only did this much. And that's proof that I'm not brainwashed. They wanted all of this. They wanted 3.5 miles. I only gave them a mile. When the entire time you should not have even given them an inch. The most brainwashed people are like, no, couldn't be me. Maybe you would get brainwashed. Are you getting paid by George Soros? Oh my God. Meanwhile, the Unification Church literally paid people to spread misinformation and propaganda. Intraday Sun says that's a great reply. Thank you. I've heard this concept before. Their ego can't admit that they were wrong. Okay. Back to reading. That day at Little Angels, Bohi Pak was extolling Father's influence on the outcome of the recent American election. A photograph of President Ronald Reagan displaying a front page of the Moon-owned newspaper, The News World, proclaimed his landslide victory. This sentence is confusing. A photograph of President Ronald Reagan displaying a front page of the Moon-owned newspaper, The News World, proclaiming his landslide victory, flashed overhead as Bohi Pak spoke. Oh, I see. So Bohi Pak was giving a lecture at the Little Angels, and behind him, a photo of Ronald Reagan holding up Reverend Moon's newspaper. Okay. I can't say I paid much attention to the content of his speech. I was 13 years old, an 8th grade student. International politics did not interest me. What I knew of America had less to do with politics than with fashion and music, movies, and pop culture. My attention was diverted during his speech by the chattering of my best friend, Hae Sam Hyung, in the next seat. Hae Sam's parents had been part of a group of 72 couples who received the marriage blessing soon after my own parents. You don't know it yet, but you're going to be matched to Hyojinim, she whispered while Bohi Pak droned on. I stifled a laugh. That's ridiculous, I said. How would she know such a thing? There were always rumors about who would be chosen to marry the true children, but those decisions would be made by the Reverend Moon, not by girls giggling in the school auditorium. 2 years later, the idea still seemed ridiculous. I had never said more than a few words to Hyojin Moon in my life. There were many blessed children his own age who would make more suitable marriage partners for a 19-year-old true child than a 15-year-old girl like me. I did not know Hyojin well, but I had heard enough to know he was the black sheep of the Moon family. He was in elementary school when the Moons moved to America. He had been a diligent, if reluctant, student in Korea. Peter Kim, the Reverend Moon's personal assistant, was assigned to tutor the young heir apparent. I'm pretty sure Peter Kim was also KCIA. Hyojin vowed that when he went to America, he would have more freedom than he had known in Seoul. The move to the United States was not an easy transition for him. Life was even more isolated in the Moon compound in Terrytown than it had been in Seoul. Yeah, that makes sense. Because way out in Terrytown, if you don't have a car, you can't go anywhere. Wait, I already read that. No, I didn't. The move to the United States was not an easy, yes, I did. Okay. At home, the Moon children were left to the care of church elders and babysitters. At school, they were the ultimate outsiders. They were sent to the private Hackley school, where their identities as Moonies subjected them to teasing or outright scorn. Hyojin was expelled from Hackley in middle school for bringing a BB gun to school and shooting at several classmates. That's fucking terrifying. Hyojin claimed the headmaster thought him both honest and amusing because he admitted that his reason for doing it was nothing more complicated than that it was fun. What in the sociopath? He was expelled nonetheless. He had been terrified to face his father after his expulsion. Had the Reverend Moon punished his son decisively back then, he might have saved us all a lot of grief. Instead, the Reverend Moon treated Hyojin as if he were the victim of religious persecution. It was part of a lifetime pattern of evading his responsibility for Hyojin Moon, which makes sense because we already know that Reverend Moon was a deadbeat dad who abandoned his first wife and first child for 6 years until she hunted him down and then divorced him again later anyways. He's kind of the worst dad ever, which is why he overcompensates by calling himself the true father of all mankind. The Reverend and Mrs. Moon were absentee parents, promoting the church around the world and ignoring their own children at home. Hyojin was an especially difficult challenge. As their oldest son, he would be expected to inherit father's place as the head of the church. But a long-haired rock guitarist with a chip on his shoulder was not what the Reverend Moon had in mind for a successor. That's crazy how we just read someone on my TikTok live comments talking about how they cut off people's hair and being like, look, hippies are cutting their hair. Meanwhile, Reverend Moon's firstborn son is like growing out his hair and playing rock music, doing all the things that Reverend Moon does not stand for and directly opposes. How embarrassing. Actually, you know what? We're going to pause again. Because if you read what you can Google Hyojin Moon, and it just, this is his photo, right? It's a cute family photo. Hyojin Moon was born on December 3rd, 1962 in Korea as the first son and second child of true parents. He passed away due to a heart attack on March 17th, 2008 in his birth country of Korea. Hyojin Moon, crossover pianist and composer. South Korean singer, songwriter, composer, religious figure, social activist, music producer, and businessman. And wife beater, and coke fiend. General sociopathic monster of a person. Why'd you leave that part out, huh? Why'd you leave that part out? After Hyojin was expelled from Hackley, the Reverend Moon sent him to live with Bo Hee Pak. Dun, dun, dun. One of his original disciples in McLean, a wealthy Virginia suburb outside of Washington, D.C. It was the Reverend Moon's theory that his followers were responsible for rearing the Messiah's children. The Reverend Moon, after all, was responsible for the care of the world. It was an odd theory for a man who claimed to be the model father of the ideal family, and no one felt the dichotomy more than Hyojin Moon. Hyojin's behavior only deteriorated in Washington. In a large public school, there were fistfights and worse. It was in Washington that he was first introduced to illegal drugs. Here's a quote. Going to Washington was a great excitement for me to leave East Garden, Hyojin told church members in a speech in 1988. So, like, high school children are just giving speeches because they're holy, apparently. Although he might have been giving this speech as an adult, but here's his speech, quoted directly. Father told me not to associate with outside kids, but I wanted to associate with outside people. I felt this was a chance for me to seek friends. I didn't care about what father wanted. I wanted my own friends. After I went to Washington, I started getting into drugs. I didn't want to be pressured by bullies anymore. When you're in high school, fists work. I started taking martial arts. I didn't want to take anything from anyone. In school, they go around in packs, but kids who had control were the strongest. When they saw me, they saw gooks. So I had a lot of fights. The more I fought, the more I won. Then kids wanted to become friends. My name was Notorious. Okay, so he was getting called a gook at school, which was a derogatory term that Americans came up with for Koreans because there's a Korean phrase, miguk. I don't want to get this wrong, but I'm almost positive that like miguk is either how you say Korean or American in Korean. I should look it up. And because Americans are stupid, they thought the first syllable of miguk was like Koreans pointing at themselves and saying me, guk. And so Americans started calling Koreans guk. Yeah, so guk means America. US soldiers in the Korean War might have heard locals saying miguk, referring to Americans, and misinterpreted this as them saying me, guk. So literally, like, Koreans were talking shit about American soldiers and calling them miguks. And in response, American soldiers were like, oh, they're calling themselves gooks because they're saying me. I just like one of the most satisfying things for me was going to community college and reading stories of people who really don't match how they present to the world. They don't match stereotypes. So even though I am very Anglo-Saxon and very white, I took I took an association test in psychology class that companies like Nike and companies like Microsoft ask their employees to take to understand what unconscious biases look like. I took this like timed association test, and what the results told me is that literally to like an uncontrollable memorized degree, I associate Asian faces with home and America, and I associate white faces with foreigners, right? So when I hear news, when I was growing up, like I used to have to hug my Asian friends while they cried because we would go fundraising and unbelievably racist and disrespectful white suburban kids, parents, moms would scream at them and call them the worst names ever, right? And like in the Unification Church, they say that the only thing that really matters is how spiritually Korean you are, and they claim to not pay attention to phenotype and the melanin content that you have. And so I was given a Korean middle name. I was taught Hangul at the same time that I was taught the American alphabet. I probably said that wrong. You know, Koreans who grew up Korean today love to tear me down and correct the way I'm saying things, as if I was given a private Korean tutor and not just taught like the most ratchet like slang Korean ever from exhausted Moonies. But it's like was genuinely confused the first time I had to identify my race on school documents. Like I hesitated for so long and didn't know which bubble to fill in because in the Unification Church we had never referred to people by the racial categories that the US Census uses. So on school documents, like for standardized tests, um, I was just like, what? And I remember my white teachers at public school handing me stacks of like white, tan, or pink paper, and me just being like, because I would gravitate towards the kids who looked like my friends at church, and I would avoid white kids like the plague because I had already heard hours and hours and hours of speeches about how Americans are undisciplined, disgusting, infected with Satan's blood lineage, right? And being spiritually Asian is superior, right? So I gravitated towards kids at public school who looked like my church friends. And I remember being disgusted and outraged that my white teacher had us like create this was like from first grade or preschool. She had us like creating construction paper cutouts of what we looked like so that we could put all of our pictures and our names on the wall, if that makes sense. Like we were making cartoon characters of ourselves with colored construction paper as an activity. And she wanted me to use pink or white or tan paper because she saw me reaching for the same paper as kids who did not look like me because I wanted to be included. And she like pushed these towards me and it's like, this matches like our skin. And I was just like, bitch, who is we? Who is our? Who are you? Like, I don't know you at all. And it's like, when I hear stories of the things that white people say and do to the people that I consider my family to a muscle memory level, I get outraged. And I remember what it felt like to work for a Korean woman in Southeast Portland for a little while, like helping her out with her food truck. She literally gave me that job because I have a Korean middle name, because I had been to Korea before. And I had to field these street harassers, right, who would come up to our window and shout about how she was cooking dogs. It's like, I have never, like, I don't want to get banned off of TikTok for talking about the things I have wanted to do to other redneck assholes who treat Asian people like trash, like dirt. But one of the reasons I will never, ever, ever be part of this church again, why I'm so glad to be gone, is because literally the Moonies are aligning themselves with MAGA idiots, losers, who are so racist against Asian people that they encourage acts of domestic terrorism and acts of violence against random Asian people on the street. They blamed them for COVID-19. They blame them for literally everything. They hate that they're here in the United States. They include Asians as part of the white replacement theory. It makes me see red. I'm just like, don't touch my homonym. Hella older sister syndrome. That's my rant on that. I've had so much caffeine. Okay. So it does hurt to hear that Reverend Moon's kids were getting picked on for being Korean, but that's not an excuse for bringing a BB gun to school and turning into a sociopath and a school bully. Back to reading. A frustrated Reverend Moon sent Hyojin back to Korea for high school, hoping that the supervision of church elders in his own culture would straighten him out. It did not work out that way. Hyojin was quite a sight in the corridors of Little Angels with his long, dirty hair and his tight blue jeans. He started a rock and roll band, and he cultivated a reputation for defiance. It was hard enough to belong to a mistrusted religious sect as an adolescent. Hyojin's appearance and behavior made it more difficult for the rest of us. We were embarrassed by him in front of non-members. Our own musical tastes ran more to the classical. To compound matters, he was openly contemptuous of Father's strict code of conduct. Everyone in school, I'm like shaking my leg, bouncing it up and down. If it looks like I'm moving, that's what that is. Everyone in school knew Hyojin smoked cigarettes, had girlfriends, and drank alcohol. Some whispered that he used illegal drugs. He never actually finished his course of study at Little Angels. Years later, the school simply mailed him a diploma. Oh no. Special treatment. There was enormous competition among the 36 blessed couples, the original members of the church, to have one of their. Oh, I read that weird. There was enormous competition among the 36 blessed couples, the original members of the church, to have one of their daughters matched to Hyojin Moon. One's standing in the church was directly related to one's proximity to Sun Myung Moon. To be an in-law was to be as close as a member could get. Mr. and Mrs. Young Hui Kim, for example, expected their eldest daughter, Eun-suk Kim, to be matched to Hyojin because of their status as one of the original three couples. Oop. What just happened? Okay. Young Hui Kim was then the president of the Unification Church in Korea. The irony was that even those couples who wanted their daughters to marry Hyojin discouraged their children of both genders from associating with him because of his taste for drugs and sex and rock and roll. The deadly combo. I'm sorry, I'm cracking up. As for Hyojin, he wanted nothing to do with being matched for quote unquote spiritual reasons. When I went to Korea, I started going with many girls, he confessed in his 1988 speech to members. I really loved one in particular and wanted to marry her. Her parents liked the idea. They thought father had a lot of money. They encouraged both of us, invited me to their home. They were nice to me. We became very close, almost lived together. I had sex with her. Damn, okay, so he's just laying it all out. I had sex with her. I wanted to do everything in my power to stay with her. I wanted to be matched with her or nobody else. After school, I would sleep over at her house and she at my house all through high school. I drank a bottle of whiskey a day. If I didn't have money, I would buy corn whiskey, cheap and potent. I had to be drunk all the time. I touched bottom. I was listening to my heart cry. I started suffocating. I wanted to kill myself. How could I face father? I thought the best way was to disappear. Then I would have no burden. Many times I sat with a gun pointed. I'm going to get banned off TikTok again. God damn you. Okay. I thought the best way was to disappear. Then I would have no burden. Many times I sat with a to my head, practiced what it would be like. I only cared about my physical body. I was worse than other kids. I was so physical and selfish. I didn't care how I affected other people. That's how I grew up. Oh, I get it now. So this was like a confessional testimony to members. He's confessing what he was like before. And now to hold a position of power in the Unification Church during this 1988 speech, he's talking about how he has been reformed. Classic. What did I know of boys? Never mind bad boys like Hyojin Moon. Girls and boys attend separate schools in Korea. At Little Angels, an art school that attracted an overwhelmingly female student body, there were a few boys, but they did not mix much with the girls. Most boys were members of the Unification Church and as such were not allowed to date. Jesus, we have so many more pages. My only encounter with a boy as a teenager had left me with the overriding impression that the opposite sex was an annoyance to be avoided. Period, sis. A boy my age would hang round outside our church on Sundays when I was 13, waiting for me to emerge. He was not a member of the Unification Church, but lived in the neighborhood. He must have spotted me going to and from the bus stop. Every week he would try to strike up a conversation, and every week I would ignore him. I was delighted when we moved to a new church building in another neighborhood. I would be rid of him. But there he was, that first Sunday, waiting for me outside the new church. I never knew his name. Eventually, he gave up his pursuit. That is such a flex. I never knew his name. He was obsessed with me, and then finally he gave up. Thank God. Among my friends at Little Angels, there was the usual innocent preteen talk about which boys ranked among the cutest. I would just listen. Having begun school so early, I was a year younger than most of my classmates. Girl, so was I. Same. I was smaller physically, too. I was not. I was larger physically. Anyways, still a pretty little girl when my friends were flowering into graceful young women. We knew we'd all be matched someday by the Reverend Moon to the men we would marry. We assumed that eventually was years away. Hang on a second. We assumed that eventuality was years away after we had completed our studies at the university and began our lives as adults. The median age for a woman to marry in Korea is 25. When the time came, I knew that I would accept Reverend Moon's choice for me. My parents expected it. I would obey. I gave the prospect of marriage little thought because it would not happen for years, and I would have little to say about it when it did. In my defense to my elders in the matter of marriage, I was not so different from other young women in my culture. Arranged marriages are still commonplace in Korea, where they've been the traditional means of maintaining or elevating a family's social status for centuries. Many young people taken with Western influences do marry for love, but most Koreans remain skeptical that romance provides a solid foundation for family life. Even lovers who choose one another as marriage partners often confirm their decision by visiting a fortune teller. Okay, so pause. I really enjoy being an anthropology student, being an amateur anthropology nerd, because there is a myth, a kind of somewhat ethnocentric or racist assumption in English speaking countries that every instance of arranged marriages is inherently oppressive, that every single person who has ever had an arranged marriage found it deeply unpleasant, that arranged marriages only happen in stiflingly patriarchal cultures, right? And one of the things that you learn when you study how like societies even land on the tradition of arranged marriages is like the only reason we think it's normal to not get arranged marriages is because that's the way we've quote unquote always done it. Except it's not at all, right? Like I'm white American, I'm Anglo-Saxon American. If you look at my 23andMe results, I'm actually like 98% Anglo-Saxon and less than 2% Caucasian, as in like coming from North Africa, like Cyprus, and like the Caucasus region that could be considered Caucasian. Because Anglo-Saxon and Caucasian are two very different things. They used to kill each other all the time. Don't get it twisted. Stop calling me Caucasian. Weird hill to die on, but like roll with me on this for a second. It's like in Anglo kingdoms that were also killing and torturing and enslaving each other all the time for simply being different religions and having different customs, even though they all kind of looked the same and all hated bathing on principle, right? Like arranged marriages happened all the time. It was only after like industrialization and the introduction of like consumerism that white English speaking people started marrying for love at all. And a lot of the time, people who are raised in cultures where arranged marriages are an adored tradition, where your family for generations has participated in arranged marriages, and everyone understands that your marriage is going to profoundly impact your family's ability to stay housed, and it's going to impact their income. It's going to impact your entire neighborhood. It's going to impact how your children are raised and the opportunities that they have. People intensely so much prefer having an arranged marriage. Like imagine trying to do all that work by yourself. Imagine having parents who give so few fucks about you that they do not help you choose a partner at all. They do not give you their input whatsoever or give you any warnings about red flags or help you narrow down your choices at all. Like could you imagine being such a hated individual even in your own family? They can't, right? So I need people to drop the very white supremacist, English speaking supremacist ethnocentric perspective that only dating by yourself and marrying for love is like the superior and more free way to live because it's not. And that's an embarrassing take to have. And I also need people to understand that the Unification Church in no way at all was the same thing as traditional arranged marriages. They were very, very different. And I'm sick and tired of the Unification Church citing traditional Korean culture, traditional Japanese culture, traditional Islamic and Judaism, citing those as examples of arranged marriages and saying that they're the same thing when they are absolutely not the same thing. In the Unification Church, you did what your authoritarian cult leader told you to do, no ifs, ands, or buts, even if you were miserable, even if your husband beat the shit out of you. And that was absolutely not acceptable in families where your entire family cared about your well-being and your happiness in your arranged marriage. Does that make sense? That's my rant on that. Back to reading. It would be hard to overstate my naivete as a 15-year-old girl. My mother had explained menstruation to me when I was 10. It was the only time that she and I had even come close to discussing sex. The atmosphere in the room that day was so heavy, her discomfort so pronounced, we might have been discussing a fatal disease. I remember squirming as I sat on the floor, wanting to relieve her embarrassment more than I wanted to learn any womanly secrets she had to impart. The truth is, I had little curiosity about the whispers and giggles I heard in the school corridors between boys and girls. I made no effort to decipher the punchlines of jokes I did not understand. Once on the bus, I stood next to a teacher with a reputation for bothering girls at school. He grabbed my hand and stared at me throughout the ride. I tried to pull my hand away, but he was too strong. My fingers turned red, then white in his tight grasp. I thought it was odd, but it never occurred to me there might be some sexual threat in his advances. During that assembly at school, I had laughed about my friend's prediction of a marriage between me and Hyojin Moon, though I did tell my mother when I returned home. She looked surprised, but we never spoke of it again. One day, we would be distracted not by rumor, but by a real match in the Hong household. When I first entered Little Angels Art School, older girls would whisper when I walked past, "That's Jin's little sister," and pride would make my chest swell. I basked in his reflected glory. So pause. When I realized that my parents were like the fucking worst because other people's children and other people's parents walked up to me as a child and told me to my face that they hated my parents. And I was like, I'm not arguing with you, like ditto. I made it my mission to be the older sibling that was well known so that my siblings would always have people coming up to them saying like, "Oh, you're Faith's younger sister." And I kind of did that to the expense of my relationship with my siblings. If that makes sense. It's like my siblings were already getting talked down to by our parents, and then they had to sort of like live in my shadow a little bit because I was trying so hard to overcompensate for my ADHD and trying so hard to be like the redeeming factor in our family so that me and my siblings wouldn't be pariahs, right? Like it's very interesting. It's very futile. It's very futile. And I'm so glad I just get to be myself now. So fucking stupid. Anyways, Jin was the most popular boy in school. He was handsome, smart, the class president. It was an honor to be his sister. At school, more than one girl wrote him silly love notes. He blushed at their attention, but he was a good boy. He took the moral code of the church seriously. We were forbidden to have anything other than a sisterly or brotherly relationship with members of the opposite sex. We were not allowed to date. We were to keep ourselves pure until father decided it was time for us to marry. Zzzz on YouTube. 5 Z's in a row on YouTube says, "Jesus, that's scary." Talking about the full-grown man on the bus who like squeezed her hand and maintained really uncomfortable eye contact. Yes, it is. It is scary. And shit like that happened all the time. One of the things that happens when you leave the Unification Church, and part of the reason you're hit like getting hit by a semi truck with like all of these mental health symptoms that you never had before, is because your naivety kind of protects you, and you don't really have time to intellectually understand, let alone like emotionally process how unsafe and really like violating a lot of things were, until you have room outside of the movement, outside of the Unification Church, to like self reflect and breathe a little bit. And then all of a sudden, all of this PTSD hits you like a semi truck. And I've read online in like forums for people with CPTSD, like complex post traumatic stress disorder, where you were trapped in a situation and repeatedly traumatized in the same way over and over and over again, rather than post traumatic stress disorder from a one time event. Two very different things. PTSD is somewhat straightforward and kind of easy to recover from, to be quite honest. It's not pleasant. It is a life threatening experience, being like mentally tortured by your own nervous system after a traumatic event, right? But PTSD can be directly treated, and people with PTSD very often recover very well back to full functionality. It's just a fact. It is, because you're dealing with one event. So you can pinpoint that event, right? And talk about that event. And then when that one event is resolved, you're like, okay. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a permanent, lifelong condition because you were trapped in a situation and repeatedly traumatized to the point where your nervous system is different now. Your relationship with reality is different now. And you often learn structural dissociation. Like you learn to dissociate as if, like as a habit, in the same way that some people wake up and drink coffee every day as a way to cope. People learn to dissociate every single day, multiple times a day, as a way to cope. Their attachment style is shaped by their complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Anyways, most people who were in who are firefighters, who are EMTs, who are in high stress professions, they're able to like stifle everything until they retire. This is what I've read in like forums of other people who also have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And by reading all of this, I'm like, oh, it makes total sense that I ended up moving in with a firefighter. But it's like, they'll be like, I was fine 6 months to a year after thinking, I'm like, great, that was awesome. I had a fulfilling career saving people. It was fucked up at times, but I handled it well. Look at me go. And now I get to retire. This is great. My life makes sense. This is so satisfying. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they start having nightmares. They start having insomnia. They start having panic attacks. They start having flashbacks. And finally, their whole nervous system is reacting appropriately to things that happened 10 years ago. And then they're having all of this secondary shame of like, but it happened so long ago. Am I a weak or pathetic person or like childish somehow by feeling all of those things now? No. Your body is really smart, and you knew at the time that if you took the time to physically process those emotions in the moment, you would not have survived that moment. So your body put off processing those emotions until later. I'm on one today. I have time today. Okay. ZZZZZ says 3 exclamation points. You are. Hi, Finny Finn. Come here, Bubba. Anyways, back to the book. We're talking about her older brother. Are you on Discord too right now? No, I'm on YouTube Live. That was a comment from someone on TikTok Live. Back to reading. When Jin was 17 and I barely 15, I could sense there was something about to happen in our house. The whole atmosphere was charged. There was an undercurrent of tension and excitement, although my parents said nothing to us children. The Moons were living in the United States at the time, but rumors were rife that they were looking among the blessed children in Korea for a groom for their oldest child, Jae-jin. Oh, that's his oldest daughter. Everyone expected the groom to be chosen from among the sons of the earliest disciples, Young Hui Kim or Hyo Won Yu. Their sons, Jin Kun Kim and Jin Sung Eu, EU, were friends of my older brother. Someone in the YouTube chat says the implications of that scare me for children that are born into cults or even with abusive parents, etc. You don't even have a prior normal to compare. You got to build something from the ground up. Exactly. You're starting to get it now. Yep. I'm a child born into a cult with abusive parents. It's both. It's like you're really not only are you like sabotaged for the first 20 or so years of your life until you're able to escape whenever you end up escaping. For some people it's in their teens, some people it's in their 20s. But then also out of nowhere, you're hit with all of these emotions that your body never had the chance to process and all of these mental health symptoms that are really intensely like stigmatized. And oftentimes they will fuck up your ability to keep the same address for very long or keep the same job for very long. And that impacts your credit score and impacts the jobs that you're able to get afterwards. There are some jobs that ask you for like 3 years worth of employment history and 3 years worth of like addresses. And if you've lived too many places, they see that as like a red flag. It's part of like the military industrial complex and the prison industrial complex. It's like somebody's got to go to prison. Somebody's got to go to prison. Somebody's got to be blamed. And it's not going to be the oligarchs who are at fault. Sorry you just dealt with that. Okay. One day after school, I was surprised to see both of my parents at home, outfitted in their best clothes. I would hear Jin dressing in his room. He emerged in a new suit with his hair slicked back like a Korean businessman's. My brothers and sisters and I gasped. He looked so grown up. My parents offered no explanation, and characteristically, we did not ask. It was not until they returned from their mysterious errand with Jin hours later that they told the six of us that our brother had been matched to Jae-jin Moon. He was to be married to the daughter of the Messiah. He was to be a member of the true family of God. I was so proud. Jin was special, and I would be special too because Jin was my brother. My pride gave way to sadness when I thought about his actually leaving our family. He was so young, and he was so much a part of my life. Ours was not so religious a household that we did not sometimes bend to the rigid rules of the church. Gambling was forbidden by the Reverend Moon as a corrupting influence. Pause. That's hilarious because that's pretty much all him and Mrs. Moon did. Like the later years of their life, literally bought a house in Vegas just to go gambling. Anyways. But my brothers and sisters and I often played a Korean card game called Watu. The losers sometimes would buy the winner a lunch of black Chinese noodles delivered to our front door straight from the restaurant by a boy on a bicycle. Would that end now without Jin? With Jin gone, who would help me with the art classes in which I struggled so? My sadness paled, though, next to Chun-suk's, who faced the prospect of me as the eldest sibling in the Hong family. I had not learned from the example of my brother, who exerted authority among us by the goodness of his character. I took the more direct approach to power. I am ashamed to say that I treated Chung-suk, who was 2 years younger than I, like my personal servant. My grandmother even called me Chun-hyang, after the lady in a famous Korean love story, and my sister Hyang-dan, after the lady's maid. Sisters, am I right? We were stunned to learn that the wedding of Jae-jin and Jin would be held the next day. We had all been taught the significance of the marriage blessing. its central role in our spiritual lives, and the need to approach that moment with due deliberation. Jaejin and Jin could not possibly have had time to do that. It was as though the Reverend Moon were marrying off his daughter between stops on one of his world tours. That's probably exactly literally what he was doing. Marriage is at the center of unification doctrine. The Reverend Moon teaches that because Jesus was crucified before he could marry and sire sinless children, the kingdom of heaven on earth had not been opened to mankind. It is the Reverend Moon's role as the Lord of the Second Advent to complete the work Jesus left undone. The Reverend Moon's marriage to Hak Ja Han in 1960 began a new era, one that the Unification Church calls the Completed Testament era. This perfect couple, the true parents, produced the first true family by having children born free of original sin. The rest of humankind can become part of this sinless legacy only by receiving the marriage blessing from the Unification Church. The Reverend and Mrs. Moon would complete Jesus' mission to restore humanity by reenacting the role of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, this time without sin. Since the Unification Church teaches that the fall was an act of sexual misconduct, the Reverend Moon would restore humanity through a quote-unquote principled monogamous marriage. Other couples could be freed from the satanic blood lineage of Adam and Eve, original sin, only by receiving the blessing and becoming one with the true family. Before and after receiving the blessing, the church requires a couple to participate in several complex rituals, most of which were waived in the case of Jaejin Moon and Jin Hong. The Reverend Moon teaches that 3 years should elapse between the initial matching ceremony and the actual consummation of the marriage in what is called the 3-day ceremony. In this case, there was no matching ceremony, no holy wine ceremony, no indemnity ceremony, no 3-day ceremony, even though the Reverend Moon teaches that each very specific ritual has profound theological meaning. Pause. So, rules for thee, not for me. He just makes up all of these hoops that other people have to jump through just to laugh at seeing them jump. And then when it's convenient for him, he's like, okay, my kids are going to get married and shacked up immediately. I grant them, what's the word? I grant them a pardon to have to do all of those things because I said so. Back to reading. Theoretically, to become engaged in the Unification Church, one must have been a member for 3 years, one must have recruited 3 new members, and one must have made the required financial contribution to the indemnity fund. This payment symbolizes unification teaching that all of humanity shares in the debt owed for the betrayal of Jesus, and that we must all pay for this collective sin. Well, that was something that I felt like I didn't explain properly. This is me talking. I felt like I didn't explain that thoroughly when somebody asked. Christians have this unique perspective on what the burden of the cross meant and what the sacrifice of the crucifixion means, in the sense that Christians believe the way that Jesus died is like payment for everyone's sin all the time. And that whenever you sin today, now in 2025, as a practicing Christian or Catholic who's accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you can be like, I accept the sacrifice of the cross again for the umpteenth time this month. Thank you. Add it to the crucifixions tab. I'm done. Right? And it's like the crucifixion is this ultimate sacrifice that has paid for all previous sins and all future sins. And all you have to do is be like, I accept Jesus as my Savior. I accept the cross as my spiritual bank account. Thank you so much for that Black American Express card, Jesus of Nazareth. Add it to the tab. In the Unification Church, I used to be a divine principle lecturer who gave multiple lectures about the fact that the Garden of Eden is original sin, right? It's this undercurrent of poison. And when I'm going to try to say this without reverting back to my cult personality and undoing years of progress in trauma therapy, it's this undercurrent of poison. And when you join the Moonies, all you're doing fortunately or unfortunately, is moving to a healthier well that is not poisoned. However, big however, apostrophe with 2 S's. You still have the collective sin of your nation and all the nations that you are descended from since the Garden of Eden. You still have ancestral sin from your blood relatives every single generation back to the first human beings. You still have your family's immediate family sin from your living relatives, right? And then you have your individual sin. So like it's just cognitive dissonance on top of cognitive dissonance, because they say that the first chapter, like the creation story in the Bible, is a metaphor, that the snake was a metaphor for an archangel that strayed away from God and seduced Eve and somehow had a physical body and somehow like fucked her in the Garden of Eden, right? But history is literal in the sense that when you're calculating, you're doing this like spiritual metaphysical calculus of like who sinned and who hasn't, who's good and who's not. You have to include every single living human being that you could even be like tangentially grouped in with. And that's why Moonies have to pay hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to Cheongpyeong. My mom was convinced that by sending our family into bankruptcy and sending enormous portions of their yearly income to Cheongpyeong, tens of thousands of dollars, she was sitting here with paper, right, on our kitchen counter being like, okay, we've indemnified 7 generations back on my side of the family, my mom's side of the family. Now we need to send more thousands of dollars to indemnify 7 generations back on my dad's side of our family. And then we need to go into more credit card debt to send thousands of dollars to Cheongpyeong to indemnify my dad's maternal side of the family, and more credit card debt, refinance our house, except we never owned a house, like go into more, borrow money from people and pick up more shifts to pay off 7 generations of my dad's paternal side of the family. And then I think we're going to stop at 7 generations because we're broke. And now we have to file for bankruptcy because we're $70,000 in debt. And now all of us in this immediate family are going to do 100 bows a day for 90 days. It never ends. It never ends. And that's the scam. That is precisely why the Unification Church in Japan can no longer be considered a religion, because they scam people. It's amazing the type of hoops you'll jump through and the amount of cognitive dissonance you'll tolerate when you're a desperate person with a lot of idealism who's like actively grieving a bunch of unprocessed trauma. And the Unification Church went around and manipulated those people into thinking if you develop psychosis, if you literally just tolerate insane levels of cognitive dissonance, I swear we will accomplish world peace and you'll feel so much better. And then they would love bomb them. And they'd be like, see, it worked. Someone on YouTube said, wow, that's a scam. Carrying the weight of everyone. This is a comment on YouTube. Carrying the weight of everyone who sinned before you as debt. This is wild. And it's also a feedback loop, because isn't the imposition of debt and money an important metaphor for Christian ethics? Like in that book, Debt by David Graeber. I'm going to be honest with you. I have no idea who David Graeber is. We used to mock Christians all the time. The people who harassed me the most and made my life a living hell when I was fundraising was Christians. So I don't really fuck with Christians like that, respectfully. Like, I tolerate you as long as you're deconstructing. And that's why it's extra sad and tragic that so many Christians aligned themselves with Reverend Moon when he was actively humiliating them and disparaging them in private. That's also the contradiction that led Steve Hassan to leave the movement, is hearing Reverend Moon kiss Christian asses at the White House and in Congress just to talk shit about them endlessly in private. So people keep trying to make these Christian references, and I'm just like, who? Excuse me? You mean those people who wear crosses and think that Jesus did everything for them? Couldn't be me. Like, those spiritual Nepo babies who think that murdering a Jew in public means that they can do whatever they want. Excuse you, how dare you? Someone's like, LOL, real. I had to hustle my way on the metaphysical plane. What do you know about being a panhandler? That's the other thing is like, it's not we anymore. Sometimes I got to keep my like old cult personality in check. But like, Reverend Moon at one point told everybody to watch that Robin Williams movie, the serious one that is not a comedy, the one called What Dreams May Come, where he's like married to a woman who's institutionalized. And it's like very like, the whole movie feels like a mushroom trip. Reverend Moon told everyone to watch What Dreams May Come and said that it was at least 80% accurate to what the spirit world looked like. So all these times that Reverend Moon was saying that he would go off up on a mountain and pray and travel into the spirit world to speak with Buddha and Jesus and Hitler and Mussolini and all of these people, and then would write down what they said about him and his movement, he was like, that's what it looked like if you watch the movie What Dreams May Come. So the way that so many like people off of MIT campuses and NYU and like all of these PhD students in philosophy, part of what was so enticing to them is that they talked about metaphysics. They talked about Eastern spirituality and like different ideas of life after death that are less like all or nothing, heaven and hell with a little purgatory lobby in the middle. And it was more about like the other world from folklore. It's more about an invisible spiritual plane, like in the movie The Sixth Sense. And it's like, my parents were encouraging me all the time to develop spiritual senses so that I could be one of the gifted children or the indigo children who could like see dead people walking around on the metaphysical plane that Moonies believe is overlaid with physical reality all the time. So the other thing that feels very like miles apart between me and Catholics or me and Christians is this idea that God is a very separate, contained entity on a throne very far away. And that heaven and hell are very far away, right? I was raised with this very like folklore tradition that the metaphysical plane and the animism that is God, that inhabits every object, every creature, right? Took that Pocahontas song about every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, have a name. I took that very literally. We watched that all the time as kids, and they were like, do it, second gen, believe it. Like, everything is God, everything is spiritual. The other world, the invisible world is around us all the time, right? And so your ancestors, that's why shrines were in every Mooney household. That's why Reverend Moon's portrait and the portraits of the true family have to be on specific walls in the home, because they combine feng shui and Confucianism and these ideas that objects literally contain a metaphysical animism that emits spiritual energy that directly impacts the physical world right now. That is very different from Christianity, right? $11.10 an hour, almost 2 hours. Okay, I'm getting so comfortable online. Look at me go. Turns out my trauma therapist was 100% correct, and that making more YouTube videos is good for my self-esteem and my nervous system. Who'da thunk? Who'da thunk that a woman with her PhD and 2 master's degrees would be right about stuff? Okay. So we're discussing. Oh, yeah, that's right. So this payment symbolizes unification, teaching that all of humanity shares the debt owed for the betrayal of Jesus, and that we must all pay for this collective sin. In the matching ceremony, a couple is called before the Reverend and Mrs. Moon, who explain the significance of the blessing and ask them to adjourn to a separate room to decide whether to accept the match. As the church grew, the blessing committee was formed to rule on matches, but in the early days and in the case of his family, the Reverend Moon made the matches himself. The holy wine ceremony is usually held the same day as the matching ceremony. Facing the man, the woman drinks half a cup of blessed wine. Sorry, just the way she's phrasing this is word for word like the document that I read in a previous YouTube video that's up on my channel. Not a live video, but like a scripted one that I made. And it's like, it's wild to me that everybody talks the same in the Unification Church. God damn it. Part of the hive mind. Okay. Facing the man. The woman drinks half a cup of blessed wine and then passes the cup to the man. The woman drinks first to symbolize Eve, the first to sin and now the first to be restored to grace. The few drops left in the cup are sprinkled on a holy handkerchief to be used after the blessing at the 3-day ceremony. After a couple receives the blessing, there's a private indemnity ceremony, capital I, capital C, a private indemnity ceremony in which the husband and wife each ritually and symbolically beat Satan out of the other with sticks. The 3-day ceremony is the consummation of the marriage. In most situations, the couple is not to have sex for the first 3 years of their married life. When they do, they must follow a detailed pattern of sex acts prescribed by the Reverend Moon. On the morning of the 3rd day, the couple joins together in prayer. So I read all of this, including what the specific sex acts are, in a YouTube video on my channel right now called My Cult Story Part 2. That's a shameless plug. Sorry, not sorry. I'm just saying. She's like skimming over it, bless her heart. Oh, no, she's not. She's going into detail. On the morning of the 3rd day, the couple joins together in prayer. They then bathe and wipe their bodies with the holy handkerchief, here we go, which has been dipped first in wine and then in cold water. The woman takes the superior position for the first 2 nights, symbolizing a restored Eve, bringing grace first to Satan and then to the fallen Adam. On the 3rd night, the man assumes the superior position, symbolizing the restored Adam and Eve, fulfilling the mission God had intended for them at the dawn of creation. This was the first wedding of a true child of the Reverend and Mrs. Moon. The absence of many of the blessing-related rituals was something of a shock. The whole proceeding had the air of a shotgun wedding. What was the rush, I wondered? Why was church doctrine being set aside to marry Jae-jin and Jin almost literally overnight? Much later, I would learn that the rules did not apply to the Moon family. All had sex immediately after the blessing if they had not already had sex before. My siblings and I were not thinking about that as we sat at the back of the church. Our parents were up front with the Moons and the bride and groom. We could barely see. We all missed a day of school to attend the ceremony. Jae-jin was beautiful in a white wedding gown, and my brother was more handsome than ever, like the plastic groom on top of a wedding cake. We had to strain to hear them exchange their vows. I'm about to read their vows, word for word. Do you, as mature men and women, oh my fucking God, they were like in high school. Do you, as mature men and women who are to consummate the ideal of the creation of God, pledge to become an eternal husband and wife? Do you pledge that you shall become a true husband and wife and raise your children to live up to the will of God and educate them to become responsible leaders in front of your family, all humankind, and Almighty God? Do you pledge? This sounds like this is my own interpretation. This sounds like they're being sworn into court, right? It sounds like they're do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Anyways, back to reading their vows. Do you pledge that centering on true parents, you shall inherit the tradition of family unity and pass this proud tradition down to the future generations of your family and all humankind? Do you pledge that, centering upon the ideal of creation, you will inherit the will of God and the true parents, establish God's traditions of the love of children, brother and sister, husband and wife, and parents, the 4 great realms of... This is such a run-on sentence. I hate it. Do you pledge that, centering upon the ideal of creation, you will inherit the will of God and the true parents, establish God's traditions of the love of children, brother and sister, husband and wife and parents, the four great realms of heart, and the love of grandparents, parents, and children, the three great kingships, and love the people of the world as God and true parents do, and ultimately consummate the ideal family, which is the building block of the kingdom of God on earth and in heaven. It sounds like the driest, wackest legal fine print. As they made their vows, I saw Hyo Jin Moon across the room, his long hair spilling over the collar of his dark suit. He was taking photographs of the ceremony, but he looked sour and angry. I was mystified. Why would anyone look so unhappy at a wedding? It is only in retrospect that I recognize the familiar pattern. I suspect Hyojin was sulking because he was not the center of attention. After the wedding, a dinner reception was held in a large ballroom in the Palace Hotel. Our parents were there with all of the Moons, but we, Jin's brothers and sisters, were not invited to attend. One of my uncles took the six of us to dinner in a hotel restaurant, but we were heartbroken to be excluded from our brother's wedding celebration. This was a Moon affair. The Hongs were clearly secondary players. Respectfully, that's some rich Asian bullshit. That is some extremely petty classism. That's a power play, for sure. I loved the movie Crazy Rich Asians. I was like, this is the song of my people. It's not, but it kind of felt like it was culturally. Soon after the wedding, the Moons and Jae-jin flew back to America. Jae-jin was a student at Smith, the prestigious women's college in Massachusetts. Jin moved into the Reverend Moon's house in Seoul with Hyojin and a large household staff. He still had a year of high school to complete, and it was not easy to obtain a visa to travel to the United States. Living with Hyojin was difficult for my brother. Hyojin had been raised as a prince, and he acted like one, leaving his clothes on the floor to be picked up by the sisters, and ordering the household staff around as if they were his personal slaves. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. He brought his girlfriends home to the house to have sex. He filled the place with cigarette smoke. Jin was in an impossible position. He disapproved of Hyojin's behavior, but he could not criticize the son of the Messiah. Hyojin was a true child. Jin had merely married one. My own life resumed its routine after my brother's marriage. I would see him at Little Angels, but we shared little more than passing conversation. He studied all the time. Regular school hours ended at 3 p.m., but older students often stayed until 9 p.m. to prepare for university entrance exams. Besides, Jin was on another higher plane now. He was no longer my brother, but a member of the true family. I missed him terribly. When I thought about my own future, and I rarely did, I envisioned many more years of study. I never missed a day of school. I was becoming more diligent at the piano. Maybe I would fulfill my mother's dream and become a pianist after all. Excuse me. Maybe I would marry another pianist and we would play concerts together around the world. Sorry, I literally had the same dream as a kid. I thought I was going to be able to work at headquarters in New York at the New Yorker Hotel for at least a year to gain in-state residency. And then I was going to go to a SUNY school in upstate New York and hang out with Moonies and get matched to a Moonie, and we would be musicians together. Same, girl. Like, you're exactly. Are you reading my mind from the past? Okay. Hadn't a fortune teller once told my mother that I would be very famous one day, married to an important man? Foreshadowing. Such thoughts were all in the realm of girlish fantasy. I followed the rigid code of the Unification Church. I was aghast in class one afternoon to see my seatmate applying eye makeup. She was not a member of the church. She had a date after school, she said. I was at once fascinated and horrified. 6 months after the blessing of Jae-jin and Jin, in November 1981, the Little Angels Art School staged a production of traditional Korean music and dance to celebrate the opening of a new theater. The school had expanded steadily since it was founded by the Reverend Moon in 1974. The adjoining Performance Arts Center was home to the Little Angels folk ballet that the Reverend Moon had established in 1965. The Little Angels, a troupe of 7 to 15-year-old girls, have performed around the world for heads of state and royalty in Japan and Great Britain. I had no such performing talent. For the theater dedication, I was given a small role in the chorus. I was a nervous wreck as I waited backstage with the other girls, my hair pulled back into a tight single braid, my beautiful costume, no disguise, I knew, for my terrible voice. The conductor was lining us up to go on stage when I heard my name called. The principal was suddenly at my side. "Your mother has sent a car for you," she said. "You must go and change." I returned to the dressing room to replace my costume with my school uniform. I stepped into the navy blue plaid skirt, buttoned my white blouse, and slipped on my blue blazer. I put on the gray wool coat with the black fur collar that was part of our winter uniform, grabbed my red hat and red book bag, and hurried to the waiting sedan. I got into the rear seat of the car with no idea where I was being taken. It speaks volumes about my level of obedience that I did not ask. Pause for my own commentary. This is related, I swear. There is a question on application paperwork for California colleges that asks, in addition to asking, like, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Have you ever been part of the foster care system? They ask, are you a displaced homemaker? And then they define what a displaced homemaker is. They don't define anything else on the application for you. But they say a displaced homemaker is someone who has been working for a long time, but they haven't been paid. And now they don't have job experience, right? They don't have any paid job experience, and adjusting to the workforce and the free market is like an uphill battle. They obviously don't phrase it exactly like that, but that's the little explanation they have. And it's like, I guess I'm just really struck by how she just obediently changed clothes and jumps into a car driven by someone else with no idea where she's going, because that was my daily life. And I remember I had to fight tooth and nail and like scream at the top of my lungs in my 20s after having left the church to be allowed to learn how to drive, even though my brother had been taught how to drive at like 16 years old. I had to fight tooth and nail to start asking, where are you taking me? Because I used to do that exact same thing. I used to jump into vans having no idea where we were going, really. And because I have ADHD and I would like ask around, and the rules aren't as strict when you're like lower in the chain of command, it's like sometimes I'd get an answer, but it would be like the church's nickname for a place. And like to this day, my sense of geography is crazy. It's like, because I'm just so used to being in survival mode in face-to-face conversations with people and understanding that I have to jump into a van and I'm limited to maybe one question about where we're going. And then I have to stay in fight or flight mode when I'm in the van to try to stay safe in the van from creepy people who we already described earlier in this chapter. Right? Who do weird things that you don't fully understand, but you're just like, this is strange. Why are they staring at me so intensely and grabbing my hand? So to go from operating like that to being the person who like not only drives themselves places, but uses metacognition ahead of time to make sure that they leave on time to make it to that new place through traffic and brings all the things that they need for that place. It's like learning a second or third language. And like that's part of the unspoken, unaddressed physical and mental and emotional burden that people born into cults have to take on when they leave the outside world, like leave their cult and go into the outside world. You have to learn literally like thousands of tiny new habits that other people take for granted every single day. And even when you talk to a therapist, if they haven't been a homemaker trapped in their home and understood what it's like to be financially manipulated and deliberately like kept ignorant of how to do things for yourself as a method of trapping you in a community, you'll be face to face with a therapist who like invalidates you and makes you feel dumb for not knowing how to do things that you were deliberately kept from learning how to do. And so it's just like knowing what I know now and having been through what I've been through now, I agree, it speaks volumes about my level of obedience that I did not ask. And I can only imagine how difficult it was for Nansuk to later learn how to drive and to later like have to be the person who makes those decisions. Back to reading on pause. I had never been to the Reverend Moon's private residence. It was an enormous house with an elaborate front gate that led to a large courtyard. A sister led me to an ornate dining room. My mother was already there. 3 chairs were lined up on either side of the rectangular dining table. The Reverend Moon sat at the head. Mrs. Moon sat to his right. Beside her sat a woman I did not recognize. Next to her was Mrs. Young Hui Kim. My mother was seated opposite Mrs. Moon. My mother smiled and gestured for me to sit beside her. I kept my eyes downcast, focusing on the patterns of light and shadow cast by the large crystal chandelier on the white linen tablecloth. My head remained bowed as the kitchen sisters served course after course of the dinner meal. I was too scared to eat the rice or soup or kimchi or seafood or meat. I moved the food around my plate and prayed no one would take notice of me. It struck me that Mrs. Moon seemed to be in very good spirits. There was a lot of laughter, but I did not focus on the conversation until I suddenly realized they were talking about me. Someone on TikTok says, that's a great insight about the learning to drive and self-direct. Back to reading. The woman at the table, whom I had not recognized, was staring at me. She was commenting on my forehead and the shape of my head. She was delighted that my hair had been pulled back for the performance at school. It gave her the opportunity to examine my ears more closely. Jesus Christ. Korean Jesus on a jet. It reminds me of being inspected like a head of cabbage and people asking if I'm married yet. Back to reading. I could feel my face flush as she cataloged the positive characteristics of my ears. Oh yeah, there's all this like Eastern, almost like palm reading. In some Eastern cultures, they do earlobe reading. Like the shape of your ears is like reading your palm. Earlobes that were long and fat, a shape that was well proportioned. All this meant longevity and good fortune. I felt panic as my mother rose to clear her plate as the dinner gathering was breaking up. I followed her through the swinging doors into the kitchen where the sisters laughed and smiled, obviously pleased by something more than my ears. On the way home, it was clear that my mother was pleased too by the day's events, but she offered no explanation for our visit to the Moon household. If she did not tell me, I knew it was not my place to ask. The next day, I was surprised when my mother sent me to a hairdresser to have my long, straight black hair curled. I was even more confused to see that she had laid out her own blue suit for me to wear. It would make me look more grown up, she said. I returned with my parents to the Moon's house. This time a large crowd had assembled. All the leaders of the church were there. I seemed to be attracting a lot of attention. Everyone smiled at me. My mother's pretty suit, I thought. A photographer kept taking my picture. There was a mountainous amount of food. Oh, wow, it's taking her a long time to figure it out. My parents and I were soon called into a room to meet privately with the Reverend and Mrs. Moon. My parents sat on floor pillows across from the Moons. I bowed and knelt before them on the floor. Pause. I think Christians, especially like a lot of the white English-speaking Christians who tend to follow me on social media, they don't realize how normal bowing is. That just felt really important for me to say. It's like I'm sitting on the floor right now. Like I literally am still trying to break the habit of bowing to people and sitting on the floor everywhere I go. You understand? It's really fucking weird to me that none of you bow, is what I wanted to say. And for the rest of my life, because I've done so many full bows, forehead to the floor, just like in the movie Ticket to Heaven, I will always get up and get down on the floor in the way that they taught me to do it because of the symbolism of the right side of your body and the left side of your body. It's like a tick for me now. just wanted to make that very clear. Y'all are weird. Stop trying to make me feel weird. This feels normal to me. What do you mean you don't bow? Weirdo white people. Like I'm not the palest one here. Okay. Back to reading. The Reverend Moon was speaking so softly I could barely hear him. I kept my head bowed. As I knelt silently before him, the Reverend Moon asked my parents to please give their daughter to the true family. My mother and father did not look at me when they said yes. So that's it, I thought. I'm being matched. The Reverend Moon asked me no questions. He made no attempt to engage me in conversation to determine what I was like. He already knew enough. The unfamiliar woman at dinner, it turned out, was a Buddhist spiritualist, a fortune teller, who assured the Reverend Moon that I would make a perfect match for Hyojin. Yeah, because she's a 15-year-old virgin in a school uniform, and y'all are freaky and kind of pedophilic, if we're being real. Back to reading. The woman whom I came to think of as the Buddha lady was not a member of the Unification Church. It never occurred to me or my parents to ask why the Reverend Moon needed to consult a Buddhist fortune teller for advice if he was the Lord of the Second Advent in regular, direct communication with God. Did I want to be matched to his son, Hyojin? Father asked. I did not hesitate. This was every unification girl's dream, to be matched to a member of the true family. To be Hyojin Moon's wife meant I would one day be the mother of the church. I felt humbled and honored. That Hyojin himself was no girl's idea of Prince Charming did not even occur to me. A blessing was the uniting of two souls, not just the union of two human beings. God would turn Hyojin toward a righteous path, and Reverend Moon had chosen me as an instrument of that mission. Yes, Father, I said, lifting my eyes to meet his. She's prettier than Mother, he said. I pretended not to hear, but I could not help wondering what Mrs. Moon was thinking. I dared not steal a glance at her face. Probably a smart move. All my life, I had been told I was pretty by my family and my friends. There were girls much more beautiful than I, of course, but I knew I was pleasing to look at, and it pleased me to hear that Reverend Moon hear the Reverend Moon say as much. I have never known exactly why Sun Myung Moon chose me to marry his eldest son. Maybe he thought I was pretty, a good student from a good family. At the time, that was explanation enough for me. As the years went on, I came to believe that my youth and naivete were the central reasons for my selection. I was younger than Hak Jahan was when the Messiah married her. His ideal wife was a girl young and passive enough to submit while he molded her into the woman he wanted. Time would prove that I was young, but not nearly passive enough. Hyojin was waiting in an adjoining room. The Reverend Moon sent me back to see him. Both parties must agree to the blessing, but it was not as if either of us had any real choice. Thank you. They try to lie and say that you do, but you don't. That is coerced consent, which is not real consent. We knew that the Reverend Moon frowns upon individuals selecting their own partner. Matches are to be based on spiritual compatibility, not physical attraction. The Reverend Moon is better equipped than any individual to make that judgment. Pause. Because we just established that he didn't even make that judgment. We just established that he consulted a Buddhist spiritualist who wasn't even a Unification Church member to do all the vetting for him. So that's weird. That's like cognitive dissonance in action. Okay, unpause, back to reading. I had never been alone with a boy, let alone the son of the Messiah. I bowed and greeted him stiffly as Hyojinim. He said I should not use the formal title Nim if we were to be married. He called me to sit by him on the couch. He held my hand. I tried to relax, but I was so very shy. We had nothing to say to one another. After a few awkward minutes, Hyojin said we should return to his parents. We went down to the living room where the Reverend Moon conducted a prayer service. We all held hands. Mrs. Moon took a ruby and diamond ring from her own hand and slipped it onto my finger to seal our engagement. The Reverend and Mrs. Moon both cried and expressed their hope that Hyojin now would prove himself worthy to be the son of the Messiah. It's always using girls as rehab centers for their fucked up sons that they couldn't discipline if they were paid to. As my parents and I left for home, my mother hit her head hard as she bent to enter the car. Ours is a superstitious culture. How many times in the years ahead would my mother and I ask each other why we had not seen that bump as a warning sign of the pain to come? And that's the end of chapter 3. Jeez Louise. 2 hours, 10 minutes. Questions, concerns, thoughts. I'm getting kind of hungry. I think that's probably why I'm on one. I'm kind of hangry. But I am also just angry. I'm so angry that this book lays out every single motherfucking thing I have always said from the beginning, from the very first podcast and interview I've ever been on. And even people who have also left the Moonies who have claimed to have read this book and had it, quote unquote, change their life, would still disagree with me and cut me off and talk over me on principle, because that's just what you do to women. And I'm very glad I'm taking the time to read this book, and I'm starting to remember who the fuck I am. My goodness. I really like blending levels of swear words. I like mixing Mormon swear words with actual swear words. So notice I just said motherfucking and then my goodness. I'll be like, geez, Louise, geez, Louise, you goddamn cunt. Drop the C-bomb here and there because it's normal in Europe. You got to be well-rounded and well-traveled with your swear words. You know what I mean? You gotta you gotta throw in some international slang and switch up, change gears, keep people on their toes. Okay. Thank you everyone for watching on TikTok. Thank you for 1.7K likes. Thank you for all the comments and engagements. Thank you, everybody. I'm actually just wrapping up, so if you're just joining the chat now, sucks to suck. I'm just kidding. Thanks for being here. Okay. Same time, same place. See you next week.